Oh, I forgot the music. Did you like the music we used last week?
Yeah, I thought the music was good.
Did the counterpoint music?
Hmm.
I can find that quick. Here it is. This is one of our fans is fired up right here. I've heard people saying they actually like the show quite a bit.
Hmm.
All right, I'm gonna just maybe I'll switch to this, and then I'll turn. Hey, everybody! We haven't started the show yet. We're just getting everything ready. Arlen, you're visible right now. Maybe we'll just go for it. Let's kick the music on. Welcome to the Librum Society, a literary live show. I am Jason Hobbs.
And I'm Arlen Walker, and this is episode 3 of the Libram Society. We're going to talk about more of Gardens of the Moon, the first chapter in the Malazan Book of the Fallen. First tale, a tale of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We're going to talk about at least chapter 2 and maybe some of chapter 3, maybe all of chapter 3, maybe all of chapter 4 if we get real fast, but that seems unlikely.
I'm telling you, I would be stunned if we get past chapter 2. These are some pretty thick chapters in this first book.
These are
Super, super dense. How you doing today, Arlen?
I'm doing good. I'm feeling good and I'm excited to be here. It's always a lot of fun to chat books with you, Hobbs.
Well, I
And
appreciate
yeah,
that. I appreciate that, and I have to say the same. It's awesome chatting books with me, too. I mean, and you, Arlen. So I got the picture of the cover. We both have. This is exactly the book we both have, too. The Gardens
nice.
of the Moon. Nice little. This isn't the first one I read, though. This is the first one I read back in '88 or whenever it came out. It was quite a while ago. So we got a new segment of the show. We're calling it "Did You Know?" Where we're going to maybe talk about Erikson or relate something from the previous chapter into our lives or something we're just going to talk about briefly. You got anything you want to say, Arlen?
Yeah, so I have been reading on my Kindle. I've got the whole series on my Kindle, and that's really convenient for when I am tired and in bed and have the lights off and don't want to hit myself in the face with a heavy book, which means that I just remembered going back through this that there's a whole glossary at the end of this edition of the book with all of the titles and groups and peoples and all sorts of information about the world that is very useful to know. And I'm really glad that I discovered it because it's going to help with keeping track of everything that's going on as we get further into Gardens of the Moon.
They kind of have the dramatis personae in the beginning as well.
Yeah, they've got all the characters at the beginning, but they've got a lot of kind of cultural stuff at the end, it seems like. So
I don't even know if I checked that out. So everybody, if you have that version, check it out. I had a did you know about Steven Erikson. All right, here it is. Did you know that Steven Erikson is a pseudonym? He was born Steve Ruin London, and he actually had published 4 books for a different publisher, Hodder and Stoughton. The first one was called This River Awakens, and it's about he's Canadian, and it's about a small Canadian town and some a young adolescent moving there and getting in with 3 others, and then they find a body by the river, which kind of reminds me of another story called The Body, but it was railroad tracks, and it became the movie Stand By Me. If you know what I'm saying. I haven't read This River Awakens, but there's just a little thing about Steven Erikson that you might not have known. He decided he didn't want to, or he or his publisher, Houghton and Stoddard, didn't want to connect adult fantasy fiction to what he had previously done with that other publisher. So that's why
Well,
he created a pseudonym.
that's not too uncommon. I think that there's a number of authors who have different pseudonyms for different genres when they write, or for different series or things like that, just to kind of keep them separate. So I know Miles Cameron wrote a series called like The Red Knight, and it's high fantasy, slaying dragons and stuff. And then he writes historical fiction as Christian Cameron, which I
Hmm.
think is his actual name.
Pretty
Um,
interesting.
but I don't think it's that uncommon. And then there's other, sometimes you have like an author who is two people who has one name for the cover of the book and things like that. So
Wait,
yeah,
what? What are you
yeah.
talking about?
Like, isn't James S.A. Corey, who wrote The Expanse, actually two people?
Oh, I don't know. Oh, I see
Oh,
what
I
you're
think
saying.
so.
I don't know. I didn't know that. I never read the
I
book. I
will
don't
check
know.
it. I will look it up. I seem to remember that. It's possible that I'm remembering somebody else, but I think that is correct.
So you're saying if we wrote a book together, we would just say the author is Jason Walker or Arlen
Well, or we
Hobbs?
could come up with a whole new name.
Oh,
We could be
Peter?
you know, Peter, I
Peter
guess.
Peterson?
Peter Peterson would be our authorial name for Hobbs and Arlen writing another epic fantasy series about our RPG adventures.
Oh, it doesn't have to be fantasy, does it?
Well, we mostly play fantasy, and
Yeah.
might help to use the material that we've created for the RPG adventures, because I don't know about you, but I bet there's a lot of work that went into coming up with something like this.
Yes. And I think we'll
Yeah.
get into more and more of that as we go. And did you know? And maybe, I don't even know if I can wait 2 weeks to tell you the other one. Have you been wondering? This is a thing I had been wondering. Who of these, this is based off of an RPG game, which one are the actual characters and which of are NPCs?
Yeah, I have. I suspect. So it seems like Ganos Perrin would make a perfect character to start with, because he's sort of our, not main character, but he's kind of our viewpoint for a lot of the chapters in this book. So seems to me that he would be a player character, but I have no idea about anybody else.
So I read a blog post by Stephen Erickson. I'm going to keep calling him Erickson because I guess that's what he wrote this book under. But
Yeah.
his character will meet in this first chapter. And I'll tell you, or in the second chapter. We did not meet him in the first chapter. I'll
Okay.
give you that as a hint. And then when it happens, we'll get into it a little deeper. So we'll get into it like we always do, and that is a reading of the original, or not the original, but what do you call this? It's almost like a foreword for the chapter, or like,
I know there's a special name for it when you use somebody else's, something from somebody else's book, basically. But I don't know if there's a special term, because I've seen this in a number of fantasy series where there is an in-world piece of literature or writing or something like that that's used kind of as a header for a chapter. So
we'll just call it a
Scott
reading.
Baker does something like that in
Nice.
the second Apocalypse series. He uses bits of essentially like altered versions of classical philosophical texts as the sort of headers for
Nice.
each chapter.
All right, so let's get into the reading segment. You got anybody on YouTube that's talking?
Yeah, we got a couple of people. We got Jonathan Davis and Super Beast and
Nice.
Patrick Stevens and James Richards and Gabe Dibbing,
Nice. Yeah.
who says epigraph. Maybe that sounds right. I don't know. I don't know for certain, but that sounds good to me. We'll call it an epigraph, and we'll look it up for next time.
Put it in the notes, somebody. We need a guy. Who's our guy? Put it. I mean, I think it's you, Arlen.
Yep, I think it's me too.
Put it in the
That's
notes.
okay.
And then we'll cover
I'll
it.
message Hobbs on Discord, and we'll use it. We'll make
Figure
sure.
it out. For now, we're just
And
gonna
then
go. Sorry.
yeah, everybody just saying hi, talking about their setup for watching us talk. There's a comment from James Richards that Herbert uses it in Dune, which I seem to remember that it's Paul's future wife, maybe. who is writing the history of the Atreides dynasty, basically. And
Nice.
it's quotes from that. So,
Cool.
yeah.
So yeah, so we have like 8 or 9 people apparently on Twitch, but nobody's talking. I guess the Literary Live Show happenings are going down at the YouTube right now. YouTube's winning. Good job, YouTubers. All right, so let's get down to this reading. You want to read or you want me to?
I'm happy either way.
Go for it, brother.
All right. So, with the coming of the Moranth, the tide turned, and like ships in a harbor, the free cities were swept under imperial seas. The war entered its 12th year, the year of the shattered moon and its sudden spawn of deathly rain and black-winged promise. 2 cities remained to contest the Malazan onslaught. Stalwart, proud banners beneath Dark's powerful wing, the other divided. Without an army, bereft of allies, the strong city fell first.
Pretty interesting, huh? So I think the obvious things here they're talking about Pale and Darujistan, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Darujistan was the divided without an army, bereft of allies, but Pale obviously had the allies.
yep.
Is there anything in here that touches you or like really stands out to you?
Well, I think the image, ships in a harbor swept under imperial seas. That's a really interesting because I think we tend to associate empires and imperialism with kind of civilization and man-made objects, and the idea that the kind of anti-imperial faction is the evidence of human craft, whereas the empire is the sort of natural force, is kind of an interesting idea.
It's kind of an unstoppable force. It gives you that feeling.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, for sure. A thing that I found really interesting because last episode when we did chapter 1, I talked about a scene almost feeling like a throwaway scene in chapter 1 where Ganos went back home and met with his sister, and they mentioned his other sister, and his other sister's name was Felicin.
yep,
And if we look to see who wrote this reading, it was Call to Shadow by Felicin.
yep.
So that's a pretty interesting thing. So at least we're going to see something out of Felicin. Apparently, she started writing famous poems. Other than that, B1146. Do the years count backwards, or are they going up?
No, I think they're going up because born 1146 and then 1163 is when chapter 2
Oh,
is
she's born
taking place.
1146. That's what that means. I thought it meant it was written in 1146, but that makes more
No,
sense.
no, I think born 1146.
So that's how like historians maybe sign things. They
Yeah.
say when they're born.
Well,
I didn't know
or
that.
or like if a character is still alive when they're being talked about, right? That they'll have like one date dash instead of date dash date.
Yeah,
for
but I
a
mean, I just
person's
didn't
dead.
know. I didn't even know they put the years in there for the historians or something. That's pretty awesome.
I don't know. Yeah.
All right, so chapter 2 starts in the 1163rd year of Burn's sleep, which is 2 years after chapter 1, where we saw the plan with Ganos being sent off to what he was being sent off to, right?
Yep.
2 years later. The 105th year of the Malazan Empire and the 9th year of the Empress Lassine's rule. So she's already been ruling for 9 years. It's pretty crazy. I think we'll head over to the images, and as they say, an image is worth quite a few words. And we'll pop in. I have an image that someone did of this particular thing that we're looking at here, which would be basically the Siege of Pale, right?
So Patrick Stevens on YouTube says, "I thought the same thing about Felicin Hobbs."
That she was useless, or what?
No, that I think what he's saying is that he thought it was really interesting that she appears in this form, essentially, when we only heard about her before.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah. I assume he's not saying that she's useless, although Who knows? Maybe.
At the time, I was not sure. I kind of was like, "What? Why are we seeing this? Why are we seeing him go back home like that?" It was just kind of like a. I wasn't sure how I felt about it. So here is kind of the Siege of Pale, and you can see Moonspawn up there, which is the floating city basically above the armies of the Imperials, and then I think on this hill is supposed to be part of the cadre there. I don't really know if that's supposed to be who we're looking at here, but all right. So let's get into it. How do we want to start here?
Well, let's talk about what actually happens
Okay.
in this chapter because it's got kind of an interesting. There's some sort of time jumps that go
Mm-hmm.
on. It starts off right after the battle, and then there is a sort of flashback sequence to earlier that day before the battle and goes all the way through to that moment.
Mm-hmm.
And then we see the kind of more stuff happen after the battle, all the way up to eventually Tattersail coming back to the camp and the thing with um,
All right.
the
Well, maybe
marionette.
maybe we should just go by scene. That's kind of how I
Yeah.
did chapter one. So this very first scene, like you say, is right after the city of Pale has fallen, and our omniscient third person is kind of staring down at or through Tattersail, who we learn quite a lot about throughout this chapter. She seems kind of enigmatic, though, at the same time, if that makes any sense. I'm not sure it does. I have an
Mhm.
artist's rendition of Tattersail here.
Nice.
Looks like a D&D character. Tattersail is not Steven Erickson's character.
I didn't think so,
No?
but I didn't think she was the character.
All right. So
Um,
basically, it's a really kind of a very lurid details about after this battle, the smell, how she is really like worn out basically, and kind of what that looks like. And then the arrival of three new characters. But right before they arrive, we meet one of the other part of the cadre of mages, Hairlock.
mhm.
But we don't meet him in the usual way because he's been ripped in half by sorcery, and he's just laying there. That's pretty insane. I don't know how often you meet a character who's ripped in half.
Keep talking. I'm responding to a comment on YouTube.
All right. Sorry. Well, you can read it out if you want to.
Okay, well, Jonathan Davis says, "What side is the floating city on?" And the floating city is Moon's Spawn, which is on the side of Pale.
Yeah, it's one of Pale's allies. And we learn more about Moonspawn as we go. They haven't really said too much about it yet in the book, in scene one, for sure.
Mm.
But basically, I think we meet up with. We feel like the cadre aren't necessarily the best of friends in the mages cadre in the Malazan Imperial army, but they just got in a battle and she was the only one survived. A bunch of soldiers were around her. They too were killed, and then three more people happen upon the scene, and that would be Whiskey Jack, Sergeant Whiskey Jack,
Mm-hmm.
Quick Ben, and a young girl we've seen before named Sari, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so we saw Sari at the end of, well, in the beginning and at the end of chapter one. This is the girl that something strange has happened to, but none of these characters really know exactly what has happened to her, but in all their different ways, they can sense that something's up with her, for sure. Quick Ben is another character that we have no comprehension of what his capabilities are or anything like that, but we know he's a mage because it seems like mages can sense other mages even
Yep.
when they're not casting. Well, way more when they start casting, which in Malazan is what opening their warren is what it's called. We don't really see it in this chapter yet, but we kind of got tidbits of it we've heard about warrens in chapter 1, but they're a place or like an alternate dimension. But how does that work as far as magic goes? And to me, the magic system is super cool the way that it's defined, and you could use it in your own games. In my opinion, if you want to like kind of give magic a way that it works or whatever. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think there's an element of the magic system that's very classical because it's this sort of idea, sort of like planes in D&D, or kind of the idea of like the veil between worlds almost. But it's really developed in an interesting way in Malazan that I think you could do a lot with, especially the way that there's kind of, we saw in the first chapter going through the Warren to travel very quickly. And then we see in this chapter kind of drawing the Warren into you to do magical stuff. And that's kind of an interesting sort of
Yeah,
almost like a double directional thing.
right. Like I don't ever hear anyone say that they use the Imperial Warren for magic,
Hmm.
but they are defining like what kind of caster they are depending on what Warren they pull from. So
Yeah.
like, yeah, if you were going to try and break it into like most people a lot of times talk about second edition and the schools of magic and try to relate those possibly to, or like you said, elemental planes, or is another school of magic, the elements, or an elementalist, right? But
Hmm.
some of these other ones are just like pretty, and I don't really think this in Malazan, definitely not yet, but in my opinion overall, they don't really have a differentiate between divine magic and hermetic magic like other systems do. It's like you're a priest, you're going to still pull on like whichever warren you worship, the person who controls that warren or the god that's kind of associated with that warren. And you could be a priest then because you're like more involved with the patron of that warren as opposed to just using that warren for power, which is
Yeah.
kind of interesting distinction, but not a class distinction, I don't think.
No, I don't think there's any class distinction in particular between the casting, and there's also an element of, as we will sort of gradually talk about, in some ways the gods are just sort of beings that are closer to the Warren than anybody else, right? They're sort of
Mm.
more attached to the Warren. They're not like kind of classically divinely ordained in a lot of ways. They're
Oh
just
yeah,
sort of very, very powerful beings who are very closely attached to these warrens. Um, and that's what makes them gods rather than being kind of like ordained from the beginning. And they have, although some of them have been around since the beginning,
yeah,
right? And
yeah,
some of these characters have been around for a long time and so are practically gods.
yeah. That
But
what's
there's a,
I think
yeah,
they're almost using the Beckme kind of concept, whereas you ascend to godhood.
yep,
So that I don't know if they were playing Beckme at the time. It's not that they were playing GURPS, but they may have got that. I don't think it's like a only Beckme kind of idea. I think that concept of ascension in a fantasy game has been something that people have kind of tiptoed around, since the beginning, or since the fiend, or since the Jesus. It's not, what's the first one? Not Legends and Lore. That's what they changed it to later. But what was that book originally called? Do you know what I'm talking about?
I
Deities
don't.
and Demigods.
Mm.
Have you ever heard of it? No.
I have heard of it. I've
Okay.
seen it actually at the Half Price Books, but I didn't buy it because I did not have a lot of extra cash at the time. So I didn't pick it up because it was expensive because it's an old book.
All right. So why don't you?
Oh, I wanted to say Patrick Stevens, and it looks like James Richards agrees because he does a finger up, says Whiskey Jack, Quick Bin, sorry, the names in this are fantastic. And I have to agree, the names in this are wonderfully evocative. And they all sound, so many of them sound like, the sort of thing that you'd see like scrawled on a helmet in Vietnam or something, right? That's very much the flavor of a lot of these names.
Absolutely. It's that feeling. Oh shit. It's that. I think it's that Glenn Cook feel because he does the same
Yeah.
thing, right?
Yeah.
For some reason, those books are escaping me.
the Black Company
Yeah, Black
and the
Company.
Dread Empire. The Dread Empire is not quite as military. Black Company is really like, they're in the military. Dread Empire is kind of more classical fantasy in some ways, but he's got some of that in there too.
Yeah. Sorry, I was getting something set up here. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I love these names as well, and it's just like in the first chapter, or even in the prologue, they're constantly like talking about other battles, other members of other places. But I guess we are introduced to the bridge burners. Which did he mention the bridge burners in the prologue?
Yeah, the
He did, didn't
character
he?
that Ganos talks to, the old commander, has a bridge burner brooch or symbol on.
Yeah. Did we decide is that Dujek or was it Whiskey Jack, the commander? It was Whiskey Jack, right?
I think it's Whiskey Jack.
I
It
think
is
so
never
too.
said precisely, but I'm
Oh,
pretty sure it's Whiskey Jack.
because anyway, well let's go scene by scene like we said we were going to. So we're introduced to Quick Ben, Whiskey Jack, and Sorry. Everyone's Sorry is like someone who is there who seems to do her job, but no one really wants to hang around with because they're uncomfortable around her. But basically, we don't know why they've come exactly, but Hairlock kind of hints why. He talks about a deal in some
Hmm.
way and says that they're coming part of the deal. The door comes to me even as we speak, which is pretty interesting. And so then seeing the girl and seeing her walk away, she tries to get a message across to Tattersail, which kind of reminds me of another blog post I had read by Stephen Erickson, where he says that readers who bounce off of I forgot the transition while I was talking. Readers who bounce off of Gardens of the Moon or Malazan Book of the Fallen, it's because they say that it's purposely too subtle or obtuse. And he says that that isn't the reason. The reason is because of brevity. Because if he went into every detail that these people just naturally speak about in their dialogue, the book would be thousands of pages long. So you have to decide, you have to figure out how you're going to do it. Are you going to just do a massive info dump, or are you going to try and originally this was written as a movie script.
Hmm.
Erickson and Esselmont were writing a movie script is what they were doing. So they were trying to do it in a way that would be entertaining, that you could make a, step through a progress and get reveals as it goes and have that energy that kind of maybe, and that makes sense when you read it because it kind of feels like that sometimes. Like even the beginning of Dune, for example, when you have this massive info dump that you don't really understand is all the thing. House Atreides, this guy, that guy, this is what's happening, this is what Spice is, and then you're just like, oh my god, how can I even keep track of all that? This is kind of similar in that way, except he doesn't necessarily do a massive info dump in the beginning. He just hints at things, and then later you try to pick them up, and that's when you go back to your glossary maybe and check that information or try and figure it out. And that's what we're trying to piece through with this show as well, right?
Yeah, yeah.
All right. So one interesting point. So we hear about the bridge burners, and I think they say there's 9 of them left, and that morning there were 1,400. That's some serious losses.
Yeah.
Holy cow. All right. This is when she sees the massive looming shape she had greeted every morning for the last 3 years, but it was now gone. And she's hinting, or that's foreshadowing, about Moonspawn, right?
Hmm.
You warned us. You warned us, didn't you? So that's when she falls into. You'd see the lines shift and the scene change, and basically it would say like 12 hours earlier or something, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And this is where we start to meet some other characters, specifically the cadre, I think, and some of the Imperial head up guys. The hierarchy, the higher on the hierarchy, including Dujek One Arm himself, who is, I guess, I was going to say the ultimate commander, but that isn't necessarily true because it shows that he doesn't necessarily Taskren seems like he has some power as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Taskren is the high mage, apparently the most. Well, I mean, high mage is used in a couple different ways. I've seen. So like high mage is almost like a ranking, not only in the army but also how powerful you are, maybe, or what rank, like what level your wizard is or something.
Mm-hmm.
Have you noticed that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely because what they say is Lassine's high mage. So there's a sense that like Tattersail and the other Hairlock and Callot are sort of like within the ranks of the army. They're like advisors to Dujek, and they fight with Dujek, but they're not like above Dujek. This other character, Taisharin, or how did you say it?
I said taste. I say taste. Taskren. I don't know how you're supposed to say it.
Taskrin. Okay, Taskrin. Well, we should be consistent so that the people at home at least only have to hear it one way.
How would you say it?
Let me look at it again.
It's Tayschrenn. I think we're both on the same page that it's ending in Kren, but I didn't know if it was Taskren or Taskren or Tayshren. I've always said Taskren.
All right, let's say Taskrin.
I haven't said it out loud very often though either.
Yeah, me neither.
Just read it.
But what I was going to say is there's definitely a sense that Taskrin is also within the hierarchy, also within the Malazan Empire, but is sort of coming from a different place. Like Taskrin is basically like directly related to the Imperial stuff, and so gets to issue orders, even though not like almost like a pyramid with multiple sides, if that makes sense.
I think that officially he's supposed to be beneath Dujek.
I think, yeah.
But she even mentions, I guess now I'm getting a little lost. She even mentions that she wonders if he's making a power play of his own at some point. Where I think like it almost is like maybe it is. See, we're already starting to lose frames. So did we lose the?
I think we've still got video on the stream on YouTube. It looks like. Dang. It's skipping a little bit.
Oh, it
is.
Okay.
Yeah, every once in a while.
All right, good. Anyway, she kind of mentions. I think that like the mages have their own ranking by power, but then they would also have ranking within the official hierarchy.
Yeah.
But you also would have like who has the most favor from the Empress, right?
Yeah.
So that person there would be a hierarchy there as well. So like even if you were like a fist or something beneath Dujek, and then where does the cadre fit into that? It seems like they're part of something, and even there's even a line here where she talks to one of the soldiers, and always an even trade. They said it's like so they protect her and then from physical harm, and then the wizard cadre is supposed to protect the soldiers from magic, basically, and so that's how they say it. Always an even trade.
Yeah, I think that's exactly, and I think there's a sense that the wizards are kind of off on their own within the army. Like they're clearly know people and all that sort of stuff, but they're sort of like a specialist component, almost like in a real like a real world military with like a division with like an engineering brigade that's attached to it or something.
Right, but see, that's true as far as the cadre goes, but Quick Ben isn't. He's just
Quick Ben isn't. No, he's
which is something different, isn't it?
He's something else.
They have healers who have magical capabilities. They have Quick Ben. They have different dudes who have powers, but I don't think they've reached a particular rank that would shift them into the cadre or something for some reason. So maybe they're more like considered hedge wizards, or they have magic, but it's more like a talent. It's not like the overall power that the cadre mages seem to have. Or maybe it's like a certain rank that you would get that you would be shifted out of your unit and into the cadre unit. I don't know. It's like an attached group, like you say. I don't totally understand how that works, but
well, they don't give us an org chart, unfortunately. So
yeah, maybe they didn't. And in some ways, I wonder if that makes some kind of sense. Just
Well, and I
because,
think that sort of does tie into this idea that is in here, that there's a lot of characters who there's some sense that there's an organization, but it's as much about their kind of like personal charisma and their sort of personal legend, almost like when Tattersale meets Whiskey Jack and she talks about how she's not ready for meeting like a hero like this. Whiskey Jack doesn't command very many men anymore, right? Whiskey Jack apparently commands really veteran soldiers who are really effective, but Whiskey Jack is not like a
he's a sergeant.
yeah, he's a sergeant. He's commanding. He's got, like a handful of people left after the disastrous results of trying to tunnel under Pale.
Yeah.
There's a sense that he's got a lot of power within the army because like the men look up to him and stuff.
Well,
like that.
he used to be a commander.
Yeah,
Right? He
yeah,
was a commander in the prologue,
yep.
but we don't necessarily know why, what happened or what demoted him or why that happened. But even in the mages, they have ranking because basically when we meet Hairlock in this flashback, he's kind of hiding in the shadows when Callet and Tattersale make it to the command tent, and he's kind of an ass to her, and Callet sticks up for the woman he apparently loves, and basically says the simple fact is Dujek chose Tattersale to command the cadre after Nadurian's untimely demise at Mott Wood. You may not like it, but that's just too bad. It's the price you pay for ambivalence. So she leads the cadre, so she is in charge of the cadre, but the high mage Taskren is like beyond that because he's like almost Lassine's head wizard, kind of is the impression. That's what his ranking is.
Well, and he somehow has some sort of ranking related to the Claw because there's a mention about him being a really high. Yeah, he has an audience there in the other room. He's telling the man commanding the Claw how things stand. Shedunol, bless him, which who knows what Shedunol means, but Taskren is in charge of the Claw, apparently, which it sounds like from the other stuff that Lassine was still sort of retained that, but it has been 2 years, so maybe she has decided to let Taskren command.
It's been 9 years, really.
Well,
Right?
9 years since she became Empress, but she was still in charge of the Claw, according to the adjunct.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's true.
In chapter 1. So
I'm not surprised though, because it seems like when people like are commanders that people look up to or respect or fear, and then they go on, they're still going to be like under them, which is kind of the soldier's code in some ways, right? Which they talk about in this book, which is covered, which I think kind of makes it entertaining military fiction, at least to me. So, like, I didn't get the impression that Taskren was a leading, but it was more like he kind of had pulled rank over Dujek, especially when Dujek wasn't out there anymore. Dujek leaves the command room, comes out where Tattersale, Hairlock, and Callet are, and that leaves Taskren in there like giving orders to the Claw. Like he leads everything, not just the Claw, but like a kind of a commanding officer of all the different segments. I didn't get the impression that he controlled the Claw, but I mean, he could probably give them orders because he is like almost right beneath Lassine, it seems like. I don't know. That's interesting. Like you say, we don't really know what the hierarchy is, but yeah, I like it. How it would be boring if he went over exactly what the hierarchy was, right? It wouldn't be a fun thing, and it would be like Appendix F to this book or something.
Well, and it also, I think, connects with the sort of magic system and the sort of hierarchy of what are we going to call characters like Anomander Rake? The hierarchy of demigods, basically. Ascendants, I think Ascendants. The hierarchy of Ascendants seems to do something similar where there is some structure, but a lot of it is based on their
legend.
Their legend, their kind of
renown,
personal renown. Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. All right. So anyhow, I don't know if we've beaten the heck out of this, but basically they've been waiting for 3 years, she said. And then they finally are now ready to attack. Right? Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
because she basically said, yeah, the last 3 years they've been sieging, they've been laying siege to Pale for 3 years. And basically Taskren lets them know that it's the time is now, and they're going to attack. And this is when they start to say, well, we've never really seen who who the High Mage of Moonspawn is, and but Hairlock seems to know, and he believes that Taskren knows as well. So this is more of that kind of, I don't know, finagling or inner fighting that
Yeah.
even these high level people in the hierarchy are doing against each other, which maybe it's even more pronounced just because of they are so powerful, so their power struggles are even larger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it just seems interesting that just now Tattersail figures out who is leading it, and he's like this legendary figure of the Tistandi, like you said, Adamander Rake, Lord of the Tistandi. Who are the souls of Starless Night? Rake, the Mane of Chaos. That's who the Moon's Lord is, and you're pitting 4 high mages and a single cadre against him.
Yep.
Doesn't seem like a lot. By the way, Adamander Rake was Steven Eriksson's character.
Really?
Yeah. So when he first started writing the book and he was trying to decide who our viewpoint would come from, he wanted to write it in first person, but compare it to our first actual, this is our first, they talk about him. And then when he actually, his first appearance in the book is nothing like what you would expect, from a character. Hey, I actually have someone that's interacting on Twitch now.
Nice.
Hey, Agonarch Artist. You're our sole chatter on Twitch. I kind of wonder if a bunch of the people on Twitch aren't the same people who are on YouTube, but I'm not sure it matters. All right, so anyway, so I think that they are really not happy that this is happening, and I think we start to get some forewarning of what is going on within the Imperial Army, at least in the ninth, right, in this portion of the army with Hive Fist Dujek and his people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of not that good. They do talk again about, I thought they talked a little bit about the Warrens, like what Warren he controls here, but maybe not.
I think later there's some talk about the different Warrens.
So there was this concept of a floating castle or city is pretty common, but you don't usually see it like this, right? It's more of like something to go explore or something, but they just know, hey, a bunch of these dudes showed up. Or we also hear the first concept of the Tistandi.
Yeah. Well, and the Tistandi have been fighting the Malazan forces for a while now, but they've been led by Caladan Brood, and then now we see Caladan Brood's boss. Right, that's what the poem is about. Is basically a chunk of the poem that's about Adamander Rake. That is, the chunk is about Caladan Brood, but it's basically about his boss, and there's definitely a real sense that there's, even without kind of, right, Eriksson doesn't need to say, yeah, these are 12th level wizards going up against a 20th level or a 30th level wizard to make us feel like there's something kind of, really wild going on with this. He's got a real sense of, the impending doom that all these characters are under, without kind of spelling out exactly power levels or anything like that, just by their kind of half remembered lines of poetry that talk about the character that they're about to face in Sorcerer's Conflict.
Yeah, you're right. It is definitely gives you a feeling, lets you know how these guys feel about the situation. She even calls herself a coward.
Yep.
At the end of the scene. All right, and then we jump forward to everyone is now arrayed for battle. So what do you think of this?
Are you showing the picture?
Yeah.
Nice. I will see it in just a second when it comes up on the stream.
Yeah, so this is the actual Battle of Pale. The sea. I mean, I don't know how. I don't even know how that works militarily when you talk about it. Is the battle or what? Is it the battle or the ending of the siege? Because the whole thing is a battle, I guess. I don't know.
In the Total War games, you put a city under siege and then you do a siege assault when you're ready to take it by force. So, and that's the closest I've ever gotten to commanding forces in battle. So,
So anyway, this is a pretty impressive image. So you got the giant city, a moonspawn or castle or whatever it is, I guess, floating above Pale, and then just fire and death and destruction, quite obvious all around it. So basically, there's just like a little bit of her being nervous and what the feel is. Oh, okay. This is something that I didn't really figure out. That so Tattersail, Callet, and Taste and Hairlock aren't considered high mages. The high
no,
mages are
there's,
Nightchill, Bellerdan, Acaronis, and Taskrin.
yep.
And they're like, there's some concern where Callet and Tattersail are like trying to figure out why. Yep, he's saying my stream is my bit rate is set too high, is why the stream is hiccuping. So put that down,
Okay.
stream bit rate, and then I'll check that on OBS.
Change bitrate.
So I never had a problem, Ag and Arc Artist, until I started multi-streaming. So I'm also streaming to YouTube. So I think it uses a lot more, but it doesn't say that it's using a ton of the CPU. So I don't know, but we'll try and get it all figured out by episode next week. So pretty
Well,
cool.
there's also, so in that same section, there's a really interesting kind of bit of lore. Back in the days of the Emperor, they each commanded a company of adepts when the Emperor had enough mages in the ranks to form actual companies, right? Which I think is sort of tied to this idea of characters like Quick Ben, who seem to have kind of magical abilities, but are sort of mixed in with the troops, essentially, right? That's sort of like the ideal almost. That's what you do when you have a lot of mages, and when you're stuck and only have a couple, you put them into the separate cadres so that you can kind of focus fire with your mages instead of having them spread out. Which I thought was kind of an interesting idea about like how do you wage war in a world where you have characters
Wizards.
like this.
Yeah, I mean, that's always been a question. Like, would people build castles the same way if you had wizards who could throw fireballs, right?
Yep.
What's the point? He dropped so much in those 3 paragraphs. Yeah, where they came from. Oh, she climbed through the ranks of the Falari campaign. Those 2 came down from Fen on the Quan mainland during the Unification Wars. So you can see there's been a hell of a lot of battles of this empire being created and trying to conquer all these other cultures.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense that these guys would have been around for a long time to have the power that they had. Even Dujek was frightened, they're saying here. So it's definitely something scary. Oh, and now this is when the portal on Moonspawn opens, and we get our first look at Anomandrus, or Anomander Rake. They start blasting Moonspawn with magical energy that's strong enough to actually start carving bits out of the mountain beneath the city that's floating upside down.
Mm-hmm.
That's when we get the first idea of the great ravens, which just a single great raven seems to be kind of a thing of power, and there's thousands and thousands of them attached to Moonspawn. Which, in some ways, do you get the feeling of Strahd almost attached to this? Like he's a vampire and he's got bats hanging off of his flying castle or something? I don't know, or even maybe old images of Dracula in his red cape, or just this figure full of lore and history, and people fear him. I don't know. For some reason I always just kind of relate, not because I think that in any way Anomander is a a vampire, but just a lord of that power.
Hmm.
Maybe that's where it comes from, that connection or that relativity that I sense.
Yeah. No, I get that definitely.
They say,
We're
oh, go
definitely a
ahead.
little behind on the YouTube because the image just now popped up,
Oh my gosh.
and I am as live as I can be on the YouTube. So we're dropping some stuff,
Yeah.
but it's okay. We will, you know,
We'll keep going and we'll try and get it
keep it up.
fixed.
We'll fix it for next time. Yeah,
Hopefully.
yeah.
So,
Well, oh, and I was going to say they can tell that, or Tattersale can tell that Anomander Rake, the particular warren that he uses, the Kurald Galen sorcery, Elder Magic, the Breath of Chaos, and in the glossary, there's a talk about this is a warren that humans don't use. That there's in the world of sorcery in the glossary there's the warrens, the past, those warrens accessible to humans, and then there's the elder warrens like Coral de Galen, the T Standy warren of darkness, which I think is a really interesting concept too, the idea that there's sort of like whole magical traditions or sources of magical power that are ancestry specific essentially, right? You could do that and do something really interesting with that. I think in a role playing game, right? There's like one way that the elves do magic, and one way that the dwarves do magic, and one way that another people does magic. And if you're not one of them, you just don't have access to it.
yeah, I think I like that because, I mean, the way that I normally write my settings or games is these are the rules, and then thanks, Agonarch Artist. These are the rules. He just said he's here for me, brother, and he's talking about the hiccuping every 30 seconds, like on a
Uh
clock.
oh.
Yeah, we're up to like 10 drops, but I don't know how to change that bit rate. That's why I was going to say we would just keep on going.
Yeah, I don't know if you can change it live.
Okay, so and maybe we'll wrap this up fairly quickly.
Well, we've got a couple of,
Pages left, some
another
more scenes.
10 or 12 pages to go.
Well, I thought it was interesting when she first sees Rake when he steps out of the portal that they had seen opening before. Long silver hair blowing from his head. He has looked down on 100,000 winters. Tasted the blood of dragons. Leads the last of his kind. Seated in the throne of sorrow. Throne of sorrow. And a kingdom tragic and fey, a kingdom with no land to call its own. So the Tistandi only live in Moonspawn, which is like this castle that just flies around. Apparently, that's what the legend
Yep.
is.
Yep.
Pretty interesting.
Well, it's very much like, I mean, it's sort of a common concept in fantasy RPGs and fantasy stories in general, the kind of ancient and wondrous power that has declined to almost nothing, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
so little left, but there's so little left that even a handful of kind of veteran human sorcerers can sort of take on Animander Rake, but there's still enough there to make it really dangerous for everybody who tries to, right?
Yeah.
They're sort of on their last legs, but there's still a little bit more in the tank, essentially. That was
Yeah.
a horrible mixed metaphor, but I think you get what I mean.
We start to hear more about the Warrens, right? When he responds, when Animander Rake responds with, like you said, curled Ghislaine, Tattersale uses her Tear Warren, and Callet uses his Makra, and Hairlock surrounds himself with his own mysterious source. So like they don't even know where he's drawing, what Warren he's drawing from, but he's
Hmm.
like in their cadre. So it kind of shows that maybe most of how could that happen? Like you hang around with someone for 3 years and you don't even know, but that just maybe is more fodder that they don't necessarily hang out a lot except maybe for the battles, and they're probably doing their own little things during the siege and before. And then
Yeah.
there's just a whole bunch of really descriptive talk about how the battle goes down, and these high mages get killed, basically. One is killed by a Kenrala demon, torn limb from limb. But then it was crushed by the Thelamin, Bellerdan. Just in his hands, he crushes the thing's skull. So it's basically like a Goliath or something. The Thelamin giant is also a high mage. Talk about I forgot I know Mary Sue is the female power. What's the male one?
Gary Stew.
Gary Stu. It sounds like the Stelliman giant, who is also a high mage, is a Gary Stu right there because he's a wizard and a giant.
Well, or he's a DM character who gets to do cool stuff like that.
That's even worse, right?
I know. It's terrible. Can you believe Erickson kept playing this campaign after his demon got destroyed by one of the DM's mages?
Yeah, that's BS.
Yeah.
All right, so the onslaught continues until we finally see that Khallet is killed, but Tattersail survives. And I think she recognizes but doesn't really understand that the magical onslaught that she received didn't come from above, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, holy cow, what's going on? Taskren was even hurt and had to be carried off by Marines from the Malazan army.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, almost everyone's dead but Taskren and Tattersail. All the mages are dead.
Yep.
By all appearances, except for Hairlock is barely alive because he was cut in half, which leads us to the next scene, the deal that was made. And now we return to the present. So when did Callum show up? Oh, this is...
I think Callum was there in the beginning. I think Callum just didn't say anything when he and Quick Ben are buddies and they hop up together, I think. I'm pretty sure he's just not as powerful, or she doesn't ask his name or something, but I'm pretty sure he was there in that first bit of the chapter.
Oh, because it said that only 3 men approached, or 3 people approached.
I think Sorry comes later than the other ones.
All right,
the Whiskey Jack and Quick Ben and Callum come, and then Sorry's kind of hanging back behind them because nobody wants to be around Sorry because she's weird.
It makes sense that Callum would be there because he's like Quick Ben's buddy. They seem to be buddies pretty much throughout this. They've been around for quite a bit. So she mentions that she feels like a god had stepped onto mortal ground. And I think is that we don't really hear too much about gods other than maybe... Oh, she says later here that it was Hood probably because so many people died.
Mm-hmm.
Hood, the god of death, which we don't really see the god of too many times that she writes about, but only like these older gods. The newer things all seem to be more like ascendants that are like part of the Warren or demigods in some ways. But she does mention like this as being a god.
Yep.
For sure. Hood. And then they use Hood a lot in curses. Like you think of
Hood's breath gets said a lot.
Hood's balls, Hood's, you name it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically what happens, I guess, is Quick Ben uses some crazy ass magic. And he used this term a few times during casting of spells, whispering chaining words with a hyphen. Sometimes I see a hyphen between chaining and words, but not always, or chain words, which obviously we would consider like somatic spells or verbal, somatic, and material. So verbal components of casting a spell, which were probably necessary, in their game casting spells. So that's pretty interesting. And he opened a Warren she didn't recognize. So we're basically seeing a powerful wizard being surrounded by other powerful wizards using magic that she doesn't even recognize.
Yeah.
And she's maybe a little alarmed by that. Lost arts. So this dude, Quick Ben, you kind of wonder, like, how did these things happen to Hairlock? and he seems to know so much more than Tattersail knows.
Hmm.
Kind of
Well, there's
interesting.
I think I don't remember exactly because they're a bunch of proper nouns, but there was a thing about Hairlock, the way he joined the Malazan army, and I think when I read it, I thought that Quickben and Callum might have come from a similar place or something like that, that they were recruited from like the same population as Hairlock was, but I don't remember for certain.
Oh, yeah, I think you could be. That's possible. I know that a lot of just like other the Romans, they subsumed other cultures and
Yeah,
those
yeah.
cultures' armies, and so it makes sense that the same thing would happen for the Malazan Empire as it went around. It would take it, they would do things and then they would subsume those people, and because they had a choice, right? You either join the force or we kill you.
Yeah.
So
And that's pretty much exactly what they said about Hairlock, right? Is that he was fighting on the other side, and then when they conquered his city or his region, that they said, "Join us or you die," and so he joined up with the army.
and so basically, this Quick Ben, correct? Yeah, Quick Ben does some magic with Hairlock, but she doesn't really understand what it is. But they ask her to take a bundle away. But they
Hmm.
seem to be asking for more almost already. Like she's getting into something bigger. Oh, and they also Anomander Rake never bothered to aim. He was being indiscriminate. Those waves of power were aimed, coming at us from the wrong side. She's asking, why would Taskren kill his own mages?
Yep.
So, bum, bum, bum. It's like I said earlier in chapter one. This book has like a lot of mysteries in it, and that's maybe what people don't like is it's all too subtle. But I love it kind of. I really feel like it draws you in more if you can handle it without not knowing. If you can just keep on reading without knowing. If you
Yeah.
can't, then you're not going to be able to read these books.
Yeah.
But
Well, and it's a lot like there's kind of an interesting way that it doesn't. I think it's interesting that it does that without following sort of a more traditional like narrative structure. Like when you compare it with something like Gene Wolfe's Book of the New Sun. Book of the New Sun does something very similar to this, where there's a lot of stuff that you just have to kind of accept without understanding. But ultimately, he uses a pretty kind of traditional narrative structure, at least for the first book, Shadow of the Torturer, which I think helps people kind of get into it, right? You can kind of, even if you can't understand the world, you can understand kind of the narrative. Whereas Erickson does this kind of grand, it's almost like historical fiction more than a lot of other things, right? Where with historical fiction, you could go on Wikipedia and look up stuff. Erickson's giving you kind of like the historical fiction version of this own world that you're going to spoil stuff if you go look it up. So you have to kind of just read this and hope to figure out what happens.
well, yeah, and when it first came out, when I was reading it, it was only as it came out, so there was no way for
Yep.
you to look anything up because the rest of it hadn't been written.
Yep.
So pretty interesting. So basically, she wanders off. There's another scene where Callum, Whiskey Jack, and Quick Ben basically are saying that they feel like they're trying to be put down basically
Yep.
by the Empress, right?
Yes.
By the Empire.
Yes.
And they
Yeah.
don't know
There's a
why exactly they can. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, there's a strong. It kind of goes through and even goes back to that original prologue. This idea that sort of like there's the old veterans that were loyal to the emperor, and the empress doesn't want them as part of her army, and she can't just like say, okay, you're done, go retire, right? So they're sort of in that position where like they're too much of a threat because they were part of building the empire and all that sort of stuff to remain, but also they are so much of a threat that they kind of have to just get rid of them by killing them off in battle, right? Because they're
Yep.
too strong to die any other way, almost.
Well, and too dangerous.
And too dangerous. Too dangerous to just let them stick around
Yeah.
because they're veterans of 1,000 campaigns or whatever it is.
Yeah. And then there's like some kind of hint that there's something else to do, and he starts to mention some of the other members of the bridge burners, and someone in the Empire wanted the bridge burners dead.
Yep.
That's kind of it. Whiskey Jack would have let blood in Hood's bowl had he been a religious man. All right. Hey, Jason Weeb has joined us here at the Twitch. Hey, buddy. Hope you can handle the gaps because it seems like we're experiencing a little technical difficulties, but we will get it figured out. And so I think the last scene is returning Tattersail to her camp after it's kind of feeling lonely now after the death of Colton. And basically the guilt that she feels at those who have died around her, which is pretty well done. I mean, you probably kind of see this a lot. And she's trying to figure out what to do. And you start to see a little bit about her own history. Like she used to be at Mock's Hold, which is the same place in the prologue, right? Before the Empire took it over. Wasn't that called Mock?
I think so.
I'm pretty sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just kind of interesting. Where it seems like her, because basically the deck is calling to her, the deck of dragons, which is like a tarot deck, apparently is what we would consider it. It's also called the Fatid, which I like it hearing other different names. But I was just reading Jason Weeb's comment and I don't know what he's even asking. Was it defilade or enfilade? I don't know, brother. I don't even know what that refers to.
That refers to the direction of fire relative to a formation. So one of them is when you shoot along the line, and one of them is when you shoot perpendicular to the line. Basically, shooting along the line is a lot more dangerous because you're going to hit more people.
What's that have to do with what we're talking about, though?
I don't know. I think maybe it has to do with the idea of Anomander Rake shooting fireballs at them or something, but
Yeah,
I'm not sure.
I don't know. But we appreciate you being here, my brother.
Yeah.
All right, so I think basically she talks about reading the future with the Fatid or the deck, which kind of it seems like you can be. It just kind of goes more into the specialist magic a little bit. That there's like a whole other portion. It's like the seer or the oracular or the what's the priest one that I'm thinking of that would be trying to tell the future. There's a whole or scrying thing. I'm going back to the priest spheres of influence again from second edition. You know what I'm talking about?
I think so. I know like omen reading type stuff or
telling the future, prophetic type things.
There's prophetic.
There's a whole one of those, and it seems like it's its own, and it's connected to the deck of dragons or the Fatid, which is a cool name. I like that. It sounds kind of Arabic or something, which kind of goes along with some of the other people that we've met have that same kind of feeling when they talk about different battles. So it almost draws her in its own way to force her, like you think of a seer or an oracle being forced by another something else to be able to tell the future because it's speaking, it's looking for its mouth to speak or something. And then we find out what happened, right? Hairlock, he wasn't reincarnated exactly. He wasn't resurrected, but it seems like his soul was passed to a marionette.
Yep.
And now we got a little Pinocchio type marionette who is full of magical power.
Oh, yeah. A wooden marionette wearing bright yellow silk clothing. Painted on its round face were features she recognized. Hairlock, good to see you again.
The soul did shift. So it's pretty interesting. But he does mention like a spell book and her having to protect the spell book so he could have his spells. So there's
Yeah.
another kind of toss back to, you know, maybe the roots of gaming in this story, which I